WQFB LP, Flagler Beach.
WQFB LP, Flagler Beach.
97.3 FM is WQFB, Flagler Beach, Surf 97.3.
Ladies and gentlemen, the beat goes on. Beat goes on. The beat goes on. The beat goes on. Beat goes on.
Hey, this is 97.3 FM, your summer fun station, and on the line with me here we have Mr. Blaine Campbell, but we're going to get started with one of his songs. His exclusive interview with me is coming up next, and since it's always summertime here on the Surf, as it is in Los Angeles, California, here's Blaine Campbell and Summer's Coming. We know it's kind of winding down, and it's actually winter is on its way, but summer's coming. It's always summer on the Surf. Here's Blaine Campbell. My exclusive interview's coming up next.
On the edge of town, she sheds some light, but it burns the ground. And I know, 'cause that brought me here. She makes big waves, but she's just not sure why they break so close to the shore. And she knows how to test your fear. Sure how we sail downwind and we're cruising now, for I know she's disappeared. Lazy days in the warm sunlight along the coast and we feel alright. Summer's coming through, it feels so nice. Sends me there to the coast, where we'll meet next year. Lazy days in the warm sunlight along the coast and we feel alright. Summer's coming through for you and I. Summer's coming through for you and I. Summer's coming through for you and I.
97.3 FM, that's Blaine Campbell and Summer's Coming. And speaking of coming, he's coming on the line with us. Please welcome to the program, Mr. Blaine Campbell. How you doing, Blaine?
Hey, Bert. How you doing? Good to talk to you.
Hey, good to talk with you, man. I was, just admiring all your great music and everything that your music encompasses so much of, like, the summertime vibe, like that song, for example.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself, Blaine. Blaine, I know you're in the L.A. area, and I knew you were also early on. Weren't you a child actor of sorts?
Yeah, so I kind of first got my feet wet, like, in arts or entertainment or whatever. When I was a little kid, I kind of stumbled my way into acting, just through an acting class that I took. So I did a few things when I was a kid, around the age of 10, maybe a couple years before, a couple years after. Nothing ever too major. I did some voices for a feature film called An American Tail by Steven Spielberg. Other than that, it was just kind of a couple random commercials and independent films. But yeah, it was a really great experience. Something I wouldn't trade for the world, and really taught me a lot about the industry and a lot about life in general.
How did you first get into that, being like a child actor and doing some of that stuff? Early on, sometimes parents, they kind of, get you into that. Was that the case, or how did this come about early on?
It was kind of the case, but I do have to say I did not have stage parents. My parents were very cool about it.
Wow.
But yeah, it was, there's a community college out here, Pasadena City College, and they had a little summer guide of extension classes, and I remember my mom brought one home, and they had an acting class, and I kind of had a big personality, so my mom thought, hey, maybe you'd be interested in this. Maybe this is something you'd like to do for the summer. And I saw that, and it sounded great, so I did it. The teacher of the class was actually a professional in the industry, and she pulled my mom and I aside on the last day of class and invited me and my older brother to be part of her private class where they did like showcases for agents.
Yeah.
So I got into that private class with some other young actors, some who were character actors and people on TV shows and movies when, back in the 80s when we were kids. And I ended up picking up an agent.
Wow.
And that's kind of how I got into it. Then I just started auditioning and, getting jobs.
Well, what's really cool is the arts and music kind of transcends as an artistic person. Acting, music. Just basically it's kind of
it's all interwoven.
Yeah, interwoven. So you're doing some of these early things early on as a child actor. You some of the aforementioned things. That must have been a cool experience, right? I mean, did you ever get the nervous twitches, or were you pretty much felt good about doing most of your roles? How did that go about?
No, I mean, I was a little kid, so I don't think I was, I wasn't mature enough or old enough to really get into the, intellectual aspects of getting nervous in front of a camera and that kind of thing.
Right.
So for me, it was just like, wow, I'm going to be in a movie, or, wow, I'm going to be on TV. And so I was very excited. So I don't really remember getting really nervous in front of the camera.
Wow.
And I also worked with some really great directors. Actually reconnected with one recently through social media. One of the good things social media does from us.
Right.
I reconnected with Carlos Avila, who is a great director out there. He's done a lot of other work, but I worked on his first film, Distant Water, with him. And, just having somebody like that with me, kind of a mentor, which these directors would be to me, they really helped me get calm and really understand what I was doing and really kind of slip into the role I was playing. And just they really made it fun for me. So I had a really good experience. I know that's not the case for all child actors, but for me it was a great time.
Yeah, you were kind of like the either predecessor or right in the same vein as like Macaulay Culkin or something like that, right?
Yeah, I don't know about Macaulay Culkin, but there's other people. There's a musician I really look up to, a guy named Van Dyke Parks, and he started out as a child actor.
For sure.
So.
And I look up to him too. His work with Brian Wilson and Orange Crate Art and all of that was great.
Oh, and Smile, yeah.
Smile, absolutely. So you're acting. You're getting these parts. You're performing as an actor. Young actor. So how does the music thing kind of? I know they're interwoven and they work hand in hand. But how did you first discover rock and roll and music? How did the music thing come about?
Well, right about the time I was kind of moving away from acting, there just became things going on in my personal life where I couldn't get to the auditions anymore. I couldn't get to the shoots and the locations and all that because I was a kid and I didn't have the transportation. And at that point, I kind of had to walk away from acting because it just wasn't something very feasible for me anymore.
Right.
And right about that time was when I really, really discovered the Beatles. Now, I've been listening to the Beatles since I was born because my mother grew up in the 60s, and, my dad also really loved the Beatles, both of them. And so I heard that music a lot as a kid. But I always heard the early stuff. That's what my parents always played for me. Mm-hmm. And when I was about 12 years old, my brother came home one day. He'd gone to the record store, and he bought a copy of Sgt. Pepper. Wow. And I remember my brother sitting down on the bed and showing it to me. and telling me this is the Beatles. And I looked at it, and I saw these guys on the cover, and they didn't look like my mom's album, Meet the Beatles.
Right.
And I looked at my brother like he was screwing with me. Like, that's not the Beatles. These guys have mustaches and long hair. And so he kind of explained to me the transition they went through and all that kind of thing.
Right.
And we put on their album and listened to it. And I'll never forget it. I was 12 years old. And it just blew my mind. I just remember listening to that song after song on Sgt. Pepper by the Beatles and just thinking, this is amazing. It's magical. This stuff is from, like, outer space. And just kind of realizing right there that I really wanted to make it a mission for myself to figure out how you do stuff like this. How do you make music like this?
Wow.
And so it was really the Beatles. I know that's kind of cliche, but what can I say? Like a lot of other people, I heard the Beatles, and it just struck that discipline right into my soul to go out and learn how to be a musician and learn how to play music.
Now,
and that's kind of how it started for me.
being the Beatles, the Beatles really early influence on you because of like some songs such as like Summer's Coming, and you had mentioned Van Dyke Parks earlier, where I take it also because you're in Southern California that the Beach Boys had a lot of influence on you as well. How did the Beach Boys influence, in the Beatles? Were you influenced kind of by both?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Beach Boys at this point in my life are one of my biggest influences, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But, when I was a little kid, that was another group that my mom exposed me to, because she had grown up in the 60s, and she had only kept a couple records, so she had Surfer Girl. And I have it now. It's framed on my wall at home because my mom grew up out by where the Beach Boys did and actually bought this record at the store where they used to buy their records when it came out in 1962. So I've got this framed up on my wall. And that was my exposure to them when I was a kid.
Wow.
And I remember when I was in high school, I had a friend, I was hanging out with a friend, and he threw a copy of Pet Sounds at me on CD, and he said, we should listen to this.
Right.
And I looked at it, and I was kind of like, this is the Beach Boys. And, when I was 7 or 8, listening to Surfin' USA was okay, but I don't think I'm interested in this.
Right.
And he kind of convinced me. He said, no, the Beatles really looked up to these guys and thought they were amazing, and started to kind of tell me the story of the Beach Boys that a lot of people don't know unless they're a fan.
Right.
That these guys were more than just, Surfin' USA and all that they were really amazing musicians and did some really...
amazing stuff.
Moved some mountains in music.
Yes.
And so I remember taking a listen to Pet Sounds, and the first time I heard it, I was completely sold. I just heard that album. It was the most amazing album I had ever heard. And I think even to this day, Pet Sounds is probably the most amazing album I've ever heard. It never leaves me. It's amazing.
And actually...
so, yeah, that got me really, really into the Beach Boys in a way that I was into the Beatles.
Yeah, the Rolling Stone magazine actually puts Pet Sounds above Sgt. Pepper's as the greatest opus or greatest album of all time. In Rolling Stone magazine, they did a semi-recent countdown, and Pet Sounds was number 1, and Sgt. Pepper's was actually number 2. So that's cool.
Yeah, that would be mine too.
Yeah.
I'd say that too.
Yeah.
Best album, Pet Sounds, number 2, Sgt. Pepper's. Sure.
So, what high school were you going to at the time? What was your high school?
So I actually grew up out here on a city that sits right on the edge of L.A. proper, and it's called South Pasadena.
Right.
And I grew up and went to school in South Pasadena till I got to high school. And when I got to high school, even though South Pasadena is it's a good little town to grow up in, and I did have a good experience there, there wasn't too much going on in the arts, as I noticed. And so I was kind of having a hard time kind of finding my place in my community because I was so into music. I was just so into music, and I was in a band. And I discovered a place called the LA County High School for the Arts in Los Angeles. The acronym is called LOXA, so some people know it as LOXA. And I ended up auditioning to get into that school.
Wow, cool.
And that's where I ended up attending high school. I went to the LA County High School for the Arts. It was one of the best experiences of my life. I really loved it there, and I just have so many good memories of going to school there. And it was a really great place for me to be in high school because it really taught me how to become a disciplined musician. I remember I went there, and I was so excited, and I was this rock musician, and the first or second day of school, I remember our music instructor sat us down, and he just said, don't even think you're going to play any rock and roll here because we're doing jazz. And if you got a problem with that, you need to get up and leave right now.
Wow.
And, that was pretty much it. And I remember kind of, getting a little lump in my throat, oh, my gosh, what?
Right.
But I made that transition. I got really, really heavy into a lot of different kinds of jazz when I was in high school, and it's pretty much all I played exclusively. So it really, really helped me learn more about music theory and get disciplined as a musician, so that I could do the kind of stuff that I do today.
Right.
And that was my high school experience. It was really great.
Well,
very lucky.
Two things I was going to say, Blaine, was playing the jazz. I'm a musician too, but playing the jazz and like classical and/or jazz with all the intricate things you have to do for that, it sets you up to be a good rock and roll player when you come out of that, because the experiences of playing jazz and classical is a bit, I would say, a bit more difficult, than some rock and roll chords, which we all love, but I'm just saying that makes you an extremely well-rounded musician to be able to learn jazz and other forms of music other than rock and roll riffs.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I just love music, so.
Hey, we noticed on your Blue Mind album, which is we're going to spotlight some more songs from, that how did you learn some of these other musical instruments? For example, some of the things that you play here, of course, you're the vocalist, but piano, guitar, bass, keyboards, percussion, harmonica. So I was saying the word well-rounded earlier, but that makes you a pretty well-rounded musician. How did you pick up all the different instruments? For example, I'm a guitar player, and yes, I sing.
Yeah.
But keyboards, I can play a little bit, but harmonica. And how did you get to learn all these different instruments? Did you make it a mission to want to learn the different kinds, or how did this happen?
I didn't really think about that. I think it just kind of happened. But I started with the bass guitar, and I started not very purposely. It was kind of like I had a couple friends together, and one of them had a couple drums, and one of them had a guitar. And so I said, okay, I'll buy a bass, and we'll start a band. And that was that.
Right.
So I started out as a bass player, and I did take lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my primary instrument that I studied on when I was at the LA County High School for the Arts.
Mm-hmm.
So primarily, I'm a bass player.
Right.
While I was at the LA County High School for the Arts, I was required to take some classical instruction, and I was required to take piano instruction. And that was not a problem for me at all. I very much wanted to learn how to play the piano because, I was a big fan of people like the Beatles and the Beach Boys, and these guys knew how to play the piano, and I was like, well, if I wanted to do something like that, I could learn the piano. So I did get instruction on that in high school. I had a pretty good foundation for music theory when I was in high school, which once I learned a few techniques on the instrument, I was able to kind of self-teach through knowing the rules of music theory and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's how I learned piano. Guitar, also in high school, I kind of buckled down on because I really wanted to write songs. And on the bass, that wasn't going to happen too much.
Right.
So I really had to learn guitar and piano to do that. And I had a lot of friends around me who were playing guitar as well, so that made it a lot easier, to kind of pick up things from them. And then the other one, the one that's kind of the most fun to tell people about, is the harmonica.
Yeah.
Because the way I picked that up, obviously I was a kid. I loved the Beatles. I saw John Lennon playing the harmonica. I was like, okay, I got to learn that. It was that kind of thing.
Right.
And basically what happened is I did buy a harmonica, and I probably spent an hour or two with it, and then threw it across the room like, oh, forget this. I can't do this kind of thing.
Right.
I'm not a mouth instrument kind of person too much.
Right.
And what ended up happening was when I was a kid, I used to periodically get tonsillitis.
Mm-hmm.
And I had tonsillitis once when I was, probably about 15 or so, and I was laid up in bed for a week, and I was in pain because I couldn't swallow, and I was basically just lying on my couch staring at the ceiling, and it was really boring. And I remember one day I got this idea in my head because I saw that harmonica sitting up on the mantle. And I went over and grabbed it, and I inhaled. Right. And I felt the vibrations from the reeds of the harmonica on my swollen tonsils. And it was like somebody was massaging me.
Wow.
It felt amazing. No, I'm serious. I know this is funny, but this is really what happened. And it felt amazing. And so I just kept blowing in and out of the harmonica and going like, oh my God, if I could just get this relief all day until this thing's gone.
Right.
And so what I realized is I said, this feels so good, I think now would be a perfect time to try to learn how to play this thing.
Wow.
So I pulled the little instruction book out that came with it, and I literally spent the 4 or 5 days that week that I was laid up in bed sick with tonsillitis learning how to play the harmonica because the vibration of the reeds felt good on my throat.
Wow.
By the end of that week, I was pretty good, and then I've just kind of been practicing and honing my skills since.
Wow, you could probably write a book, like a doctor's book for doctors across the world that they're trying to figure out how to cure tonsillitis. You could be a billionaire, man. Just grab a
they
harmonica.
should just prescribe harmonica lessons.
There you go. Hey, I find it very cool. When you were in the L.A. County High School for the Arts, you study with probably some pretty cool musicians, people that maybe you ended up looking up to, because some notable musicians and stuff. Is there anybody in your mind that sticks out that you were like, this guy or gal showed me, something that really sticks to this day? Was there anything notable that happened? I mean, you did so many things in that school, but is there anything that comes to mind that really was like a moment for you in school? School?
Yeah. There were a couple people. I don't know how well known they are, so I don't know how well our listeners would know them. There was one guy, I don't think he's very well known, but he was an excellent teacher named Craig Kupka, and he was my jazz instructor. First couple of years I was there, and he was a nice guy, and but very very good at being disciplinary, and we needed that. I feel that we did at the time. We were 16-year-old rock musicians, and we needed somebody to kind of keep us in line and keep us focused on what we were trying to do. He was excellent at that. A couple other people who've had some success in music that I worked with. There's a guy named Bobby Rodriguez, who's kind of a well-known jazz musician out here in the Los Angeles area. He's always playing at some big club or some big venue out here. I see him in the paper occasionally. Wow. He was my jazz instructor as well, and he really taught me a lot about music and about technique and things like that. And he was also a big influence because I really respected him, and when he would respect me back as a musician, it really motivated me, and it really empowered me to believe in what I was doing. So I really got to tip my hat to Bobby. And the person I think who probably influenced me the most was a guy who's a kind of a well-known bass player in the jazz world. His name's Gary Willis.
Okay.
He used to play with a group called Tribal Tech that was very famous in the jazz fusion world.
Absolutely.
And he is also the former bass player for a famous bebop musician named Wayne Shorter. And I had the privilege of studying with Gary for about a year or two in high school. I just had a chance meeting with him. It was just a chance meeting, and it turned into getting some lessons. And I've told people this before. I really feel that studying with Gary Willis, I mean, this guy is an amazing bass player. He used to be I think the spokesperson for Ibanez Basses or something like that for a while.
Nice.
And he really, really, really is a talented guy. And I feel that he kind of helped me flip this switch in my head through talking, not through playing, just having a dialogue about music. Helped me kind of flip this switch in my head to where I got so comfortable with the music, I was no longer letting the music control me when I was making it, but I was completely in control of the situation.
That's great.
And at that time in my life, sometimes when I was making music, I was getting mixed up with what scale I was using, or does this chord work with this chord, or why is this note not sounding right? And I'd get stuck on these things, and I'd just be kind of stuck there. And Gary taught me how to, work through those things and really take control of the music and really get out of my head what I'm trying to get out of my head.
That's great, because
that was just an invaluable gift that I have no idea how he did it, because I remember a lot of times he'd spend 50 minutes with me talking, and the last 10 minutes of our lesson we'd actually play.
Wow.
And I used to think I was throwing my money away until about 6 months later I realized one day I'm significantly better just through our talks.
Well, because that's a hard place to be. You're kind of like, even myself, I'm not there because I probably could have used someone like him in my life, because we're our hardest critics. We're trying so hard to create something, and you end up not sure of yourself, and you doubt yourself, and you just don't know where you're going, because a song starts from your mind and then it ends up finished, and then you're still not happy with it. So to be able to feel confident that you're on the right path and having some sort of mindset, it probably was very helpful to you, So
yeah, it definitely was. I definitely owe a debt to Gary Willis.
Great. So you're in Los Angeles County High School for the Arts, and then you graduate there. So where do you go from there? I mean, you were doing that. You're with these notable musicians, these instructors, and taking lessons and stuff. Where does Blaine Campbell go once he's starting to roll from there? Like, what path did you take then from that point in your music career?
Well, so what happened after high school? I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. I wanted to go to school for music, and I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to the Berklee College of Music out in Boston.
Yeah.
But it was a very expensive school, and the scholarship wasn't going to cover the fees, and my parents didn't have much money, so they couldn't, that wasn't in the cards.
Right.
And so I was trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do? A couple weeks after high school, I actually got an opportunity from a friend that was working at a production company out in Burbank, California, to come work there. And he said, just show up for a week and help out around the office, and I think these guys will see some value in you and hire you. And that's exactly what I did. It was called SKS Productions.
Yeah.
And it stood for Sing Karaoke Sing Productions out in Burbank. And this was back in the 90s, and what we were doing is we were making the music for JVC and Sony karaoke cartridges.
Yeah.
And this is back in like the infancy of the karaoke industry. This is back in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
And so I went to work for these guys doing this. So I would kind of work on like the lyric synchronization where you see the colors going through the lyrics as the melody goes along.
Right.
I was kind of working on programming those, and I was working on doing some of the instrumental parts for some of the karaoke songs. And then also these guys I was working with would occasionally produce or engineer spots for songs that would be included on something like a movie of the week on TV or something like that.
Right.
And so they'd let me come into the studio with them, and they kind of taught me how to work around the studio and kind of taught me about mic placement and that kind of thing.
That's great.
So that's what I did for a little while when I got out of high school, and that was a really good crash course in in the music industry.
Yeah.
And a couple of the guys I worked with are doing really well now. I worked for a guy named Dave Vanacore, and he was a great boss. I learned a lot from him working there, and he went on to win a Grammy, I think, for best music in a TV series. I believe he did the music for the TV show Survivor.
Survivor. It was. Yep, it was Survivor.
Yeah, and I remember just watching the awards show, and there's my boss up on stage getting a Grammy. I hadn't seen him in a long time, but I was like, wow. So I worked there for a while, and it was a great experience. I learned a lot from those guys, but kind of realized that wasn't really my thing. So I got out of there, and I actually moved up to Santa Cruz, California for a little while just to live and kind of figure out what I wanted to do.
That's awesome.
But I came back to LA, and I started a band, and that's pretty much what I've been doing with my adult life. I've been in bands, or I've been doing solo stuff, and working on my projects and my different albums.
Well, we're going to be talking about Blue Mind coming up here shortly, but I know that in a few you also recorded some other albums prior to some of the tracks that we're playing here from Blue Mind. Could you tell us about the recording projects that you had prior to Blue Mind? I know you recorded a few albums, and then you played all over LA and everywhere.
Yeah, sure.
Over. So how did that
go? So my first album I put out back in about 2000, I think, and it was just something I did on my 4-track, my old Tascam 424 4-track.
Right.
And that record was called Out of My Head. And I've done a couple since then. I've done one called Carolina Sky, and I did one a few years back, about 5 years or so ago, called The Secret Snowstorm. And they're all available on my Bandcamp page if anybody wants to go and look at them or listen to them. And yeah, I mean, I try to do something a little bit different on every album. My last album, The Secret Snowstorm, was very much kind of a concept album and a theme album, and I had a lot of fun recording that one. And yeah, that's about it with the album.
I wanted to ask you, in regards to those albums, has your, I don't want to say writing style changed, but your influences to that in the time where you are at that stage of your life, the 2000, leading all the way up until the album before this one. I know what Blue Mind's all about, and it really has the full influence of the Beach Boys, the Beatles, and a lot of other, you can hear it in it. What were you influenced by early, like those influences you talked about? Would you say that those other 3 albums had influences of this nature, or was it kind of some different directions at the time when you were making those?
Yeah, I mean, some of my, I have a handful of influences, I think, that are kind of like mainstays. They're with me all the time.
Right.
So I think on all of my stuff, you can hear some Beatles influence, you can hear some Beach Boys influence, maybe some Lou Reed or Velvet Underground.
Oh, yeah.
John Sebastian, The Lovin' Spoonful.
Yeah.
A lot of the, singer-songwriter stuff. Elliott Smith for a more contemporary musician.
Yeah.
Or maybe some old Beck from the 90s or so. That's definitely an influence. But on The Secret Snowstorm, the last album I did, I used a lot more influence from some of the stuff I grew up with in the 90s that I really liked. So I was thinking technologically kind of some of Beck's old albums like Odelay or Midnight Vultures.
Yeah.
Or even kind of not the Beach Boys, the Beastie Boys, but not necessarily rap or hip hop. Obviously, that's not the direction I'm moving in, but more of the sound of the music and the technology. Beck and the Beastie Boys kind of had a similar thing going on.
Right.
I feel back in the '90s and that sound, and I kind of tried to mix those in with like the '60s, '70s California songwriter kind of thing, and I did some tracks where I kind of put those styles together to see what it sounded like.
Yeah.
And I liked the way it came out.
That's pretty cool when you put such a thing, like you throw all these ingredients in a blender, and when it comes out, it's Blaine Campbell's sound. It's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you mix it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Let the blender go, and when it pops out, you can hear a little bit of all the influences. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely.
You being a bass player and you being influenced a little bit by John Sebastian, good friend of mine that has a place right here in town, right up the street from our radio station, is Steve Boone, the bass player of the Lovin' Spoonful. And,
Steve Boone, sure.
Yeah, and he ended up, I'm good friends with him, and he ends up on our album, The Cherry Drops, playing bass on a song, and he was in one of our music videos as well, to our song called Far Out. But you being a bass player, I was going to say, you being a bass player and influenced by the Beach Boys, that Brian Wilson guy must have really, had a influence on you, being that, Brian is primarily, of course he plays the piano and such, but he's starting out as a bass player in the band The Beach Boys. That was his main instrument during that time period when the Beach Boys started out. So I can see how you kind of blended Brian's ethics, and especially with this Blue Mind thing. We're going to go back and ask you some more questions, but if you don't mind, we'd actually like to play another song from the Blue Mind release, which came out. It's your latest release here, and we want to feature a song called Hold On Baby. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Blaine?
Yeah, sure. So that's a song I wrote for my wife.
Nice.
Michelle. That was one I was really happy about. So there were a couple things going on when I wrote that song. I think where it all started was I was watching some kind of interview, I think, with Brian Wilson, and he was talking about Don't Worry Baby by the Beach Boys.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about how that song came about because he was so enamored by the song Be My Baby that Phil Spector had done.
Right.
With the Ronettes, I think they called the band.
Correct.
But anyways, the Be My Baby song, that Brian Wilson kind of did Don't Worry Baby as kind of a reaction to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember kind of looking at the two chord charts for Be My Baby and Don't Worry Baby and seeing similarities and differences and kind of tapping into like what kind of Brian Wilson did and where he took it. And kind of going, wow, that's really cool. And I thought, like, artistically as a concept, that's kind of a cool idea. To take this song you really love and say, maybe I can do something similar and kind of try to take it to a new place.
Right.
And that's what he did with Don't Worry Baby, and I think he did it really successfully. I love both of those songs.
Yes.
I like Don't Worry Baby better.
Right.
I mean, that's just me. So all the Be My Baby people are going to get upset with me. That's me. So anyway, so I sat down at the piano kind of with these chords in mind, and I said, okay, I'm going to take my shot at it. And so I did, and I came up with Hold On Baby instead. So there, Be My Baby, Don't Worry Baby, and I came up with my Hold On Baby. And so that was kind of the foundation for what I was thinking about when I sat down at the piano to write it. And then another thing I was very influenced by in the writing of that song was an album I hold very close to my heart, called Pacific Ocean Blue by Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys.
Incredible album.
And,
love that album.
Yeah, in my opinion, it's one of the best solo rock albums by somebody who'd been in a famous band, ever made. I'd say Pacific Ocean Blue rivals any solo album that any of the Beatles made.
Right.
It really is amazing.
Yeah.
And there's a sound and a vibe and a feeling on that album.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of tried to tap into that with Hold On Baby.
Nice.
And so that's kind of where it comes from. And then obviously the lyrics are just kind of a song to my wife.
All right. Well, let's hear it now. So here we go, everybody. This is Blaine Campbell and his take on Don't Worry Baby / Be My Little Baby, and taking it to another level with Hold On Baby. It's Blaine Campbell here on 97.3 FM The Surf. We'll be right back to chat with him some more. Stay tuned. Here's Hold On Baby.
Closed my eyes and felt the water as it carried me on a course we hadn't charted, drifting out to sea. Stronger tides had made the current, pulled me different ways, till she brought me to the surface and we found our place. As the riptide pulls us under, hold on baby, when all you hear is rain and thunder, hold on baby. At the time you stop and wonder, hold on baby, 'cause we've always got each other, hold on baby. There were times of clear direction made no sense to me, looking for the right connection, waiting on a breeze. When I saw the satisfaction swim across her face, then I knew I wasn't sinking as I made my case. As the riptide pulls us under, hold on baby, when all you hear is rain and thunder, hold on baby. At the time you stop and wonder, hold on baby, 'cause we've always got each other, hold on baby.
Surf Radio 97.3 FM. That's Blaine Campbell and Hold On Baby. And you can definitely hear the Dennis Wilson style influence from his great album, Pacific Ocean Blue. So in the studio, or I should say on the phone in the studio, with us is still Blaine Campbell. That's a great song, man. I love that song. It's very pretty.
Thank you.
Yeah, it just it does have that Dennis Wilson vibe, and I can definitely hear the influences in there.
Awesome. It's not quite Dennis, but it was a good shot.
Hey, right now, my cell phone just went off. I had to cancel it, but it was It was Dennis Stefano from the Buckinghams just called me. So I I should have turned my cell phone off just moments ago, but all right. Sorry about that, Blaine.
Sure, no problem.
So just a great song there. Hey, I heard off the air here that you have some sort of ties in with the family, the Beach Boys family. Can you tell us a little bit about that? That's very interesting.
Well, it's kind of funny that the whole thing with the Beach Boys, now obviously I've told you they are one of my biggest influences, if not, my biggest. I really love the Beach Boys, and I love Brian Wilson, Dennis Wilson, all the guys. They've all made huge contributions to music, in my opinion. But it is kind of funny. Sometimes I wonder why I'm so drawn to it. And it's interesting because what I've learned over the years that I actually didn't really know this when I first really started getting into them heavy. I've learned as an adult that my mom's older sister, one of my aunts, actually knew Mike Love when they were growing up. My mom grew up in an area till she was a teenager called Windsor Hills.
Right.
And Windsor Hills is actually right next to Hawthorne, where the Beach Boys are from.
Yeah.
And Windsor Hills is... it's either the area or right next to the area where Mike Love lived as well. And the girl who lived in the house next to Mike Love was my aunt's best friend. And they've actually been friends their whole lives. I know this woman too. She's a family friend because they've known each other their whole lives. And my aunt told me when they were children, she used to go there and play, and she said Mike was a little younger than us, so we used to pick on him a lot. So she said, I'm not sure how happy he'd be to see me nowadays if I ever ran into him. But she said, but I knew Mike Love from the Beach Boys, and of course I'm sitting there with my, jaw dropping going, oh my God, are you serious? And my aunt, isn't big into rock or pop music, so it didn't really matter much to her, but it sure did to me.
Yeah, that's definitely cool.
So that was kind of an interesting connection. And then, maybe two of my aunts, at least one of my aunts, graduated from Dorsey High, and they're all the same age as the Beach Boys. And, that's where Mike went to school, and I don't know, Carl and Dennis might have gone to school there for a while as well.
Right.
So I kind of got that connection. And then on my father's side of the family, I remember maybe 10 or 20 years ago, I was over at my aunt and uncle's house, and my Aunt Kathy, on my dad's side of the family, was telling me that when she was a kid, she grew up in a suburb of L.A., I think it was Bell or Bell Gardens. She grew up in one of those cities, which is a suburb of L.A., and she was telling me that back in the 60s, there was, I don't know, some hamburger stand, maybe a Foster's Freeze or something like that, the kids used to hang out at after school. And she said, yeah, Jan and Dean and the Beach Boys used to roll through once in a while. We'd go in there and we'd see them sitting there having a burger, a shake, or just hanging out or something like that.
Right.
And, of course, my jaw drops again. I'm like, wait a minute. You saw the Beach Boys. You saw Jan and Dean, back when they were in their heyday. And she said, oh, yeah, we'd see them in there. And she said, I was a little embarrassed or shy to go talk to them or anything. So she doesn't have any memory of, chatting with them. But she has memory of just hanging out at this place and, Jan Barry would walk in, or maybe Carl and Dennis or something like that. And so, my parents are from L.A., and they're about the same age as the Beach Boys.
Right.
So I guess it's kind of inevitable maybe that things like that were going to happen.
That is really cool. Speaking of Mike Love just put out his solo album, Looking Back with Love. So Mike Love, that's a pretty cool story, though, to be able to have those tie-ins with members of the Beach Boys, Jan and Dean.
Yeah, it's interesting. I talked to Mike about it once, and I had reminded him of this. Actually, we've talked about it a couple times.
Yeah. And
it's funny because about 10 or 15 years ago, I was talking to Mike, and I told him, who I was, and that my aunt, was Carol Mosley or whatever her name was at the time, and her friend. And he kind of looked up in the sky and then looked back at me. He said, yeah, I remember her. He said,
wow.
Gosh, that was a long time ago. I haven't heard that name in a long time. And so I was just kind of like, wow, well, that verifies it.
Wow.
But it was kind of funny because a couple of years ago I ran into Mike again, and I brought it up with him again, and he kind of looked up like he was thinking about it, and then he looked at me and he said, I'm not sure I remember her. And I said, huh. And I said, well, last time we talked you did.
Right.
And it was kind of funny because he kind of looked at me and gave me this grin, and he said, well, I mean, I guess I should remember it. It's only been, 60 years or something like that? And then, and then we both just kind of had a good laugh and moved on to something else.
That's great. That's a great
Yeah.
story, man. That's great. Yeah, it's super cool. I mean, people, think LA's such a huge place, and yeah, it is. But you'd be surprised if you're in sort of in the same circle, music or whatever, or just hanging. Sometimes you run into the strangest, coolest people. It's kind of a smaller world than we know. So
Yeah, it sure is.
So tell us a little bit about some of your places. Like, so you've recorded, we left off where you recorded these earlier albums, and then you started really honing your chops, going out and playing from here, there, and everywhere. I mean, you played down at the Pacific Ocean, you played, pretty much every corner of Los Angeles and the East Side and everywhere. So you've really hit the road then, both in your band as well as solo stuff, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been playing live and in bands in LA, since I was 14 or 15.
Right.
That's a long time ago now for me. So, you just, if you live in one place and you're playing for that long, you're inevitably going to end up in pretty much every pocket of the city at some point doing a show.
Right. Did anybody ever tell you, by the way, looking at your picture, that you kind of look like a little bit like Brian Wilson, a little bit, with your shades on? Yeah. A young Brian Wilson.
No, I haven't heard that one too many times, but hey, I'll take it.
Yeah.
That's all right.
I want to say a quote here. It came from a gentleman by the name of Ross Lincoln from Laced.com. He says, and I quote, "Blaine Campbell knows and understands pop music like it was in his DNA, or written in his DNA." So, all these experiences between the jazz, the LA County High School for the Arts, even being a child actor, everything that you've done, you kind of just soaked it in like a sponge, it seems, and you have such an understanding of this music we call pop and rock and of course jazz and everything. I mean, it seems to me you're a pretty well-rounded musician because of all of your experiences in it.
Oh, well, thanks.
Yeah. So then you move on to this album. When did you start working on the album that we just played 2 cuts for, Blue Mind? When did that first start, or what was going through your mind when you were about to make that album?
Okay, so I recorded that album probably mostly 2015, 2016, and I really got started on it because I was playing in a band a few years ago, a great band. I was playing with some really great guys. Playing with a guy named Luis Vasquez. He's a really good singer-songwriter out here in LA.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a couple other guys in the band that I was playing with. A drummer named Chris Moore, really, really talented percussionist that I know from LA, and a good friend of mine, David Cook, who played a lot of guitar and piano and bass. He's multi-talented,
Mm-hmm.
amazingly technically skilled musician. And David and I have been playing together since we were 13, 14 years old, our first band. And he's worked on all my stuff with me. And I was playing with these guys in a band, and it was really great. We had a really great sound, and we do have stuff up online if people want to check us out. We're called The Sound Committee, and we have a Facebook page and a Bandcamp page. But it got to that point of where life was just getting in the way.
Right. Right.
As you know, Vern, being in a band, you have 4 competing schedules, you have 4 guys, we're all adults. Everybody's got careers, and it just got to a point where we literally physically couldn't do it anymore. We couldn't find the time between the 4 of us.
Right.
And so we kind of had to walk away from that, which is too bad because it was a really good band. These guys are really great musicians and great guys to play with. We hope to revisit it someday.
Yeah.
We were working on an album, and we hope to finish it up.
Right.
But I was playing with them, and I really, really just felt like the need to be productive, to be doing something that's going to be coming to a finished product and coming out. And so once we kind of realized that this band was maybe going to have to take a break or whatever, I just dove headfirst into the Blue Mind project.
Right.
And part of it also was because a lot of the songs on Blue Mind I saved for that album because the band I was in, when you're in a band, I think sometimes you can't just always do every song you write.
Right.
Even if you like the song. Bands have a certain vibe, they have a certain energy, they have a certain thing going on, and sometimes a certain song is a good song, but it doesn't work with that band. It works with another band or another artist.
That's true.
And so I have all these songs that I've written that I had never kind of taken to the band because I didn't think they were appropriate for the band, or maybe the guys in the band wouldn't want to do it because it's a really slow song and it might be kind of boring or something like that.
Right.
So there are kind of some songs that I held back. from the band, and a lot of those kind of ended up on the Blue Mind album.
Yeah.
There were songs that I loved. I thought they had good quality to them, and I wanted them to be heard, but I didn't have the right outlet for them in my band. And so when I started working on the solo album, I was able to work a lot of that material into Blue Mind.
That's great. I know that when you're working in a band project and stuff like that, like sometimes even something ends up on an album that later you go, I don't know if that should have been on there. Like, we're our worst critics, but our second album, there's this particular song on our 14-song second album, and it's 3/4 of the way through the album, and it just doesn't fit. It just stops the flow, but I kind of let it go through. We all kind of let it go. Anyway, I know what you're saying because and
it happens sometimes. So and another thing I should point out is two of the guys that I talked about from that band, David Cook and Chris Moore, actually played all over the Blue Mind album.
Nice.
So I was very fortunate to have them, even though our other band wasn't really working out at the time, I was really fortunate to have their, time and commitment to come in and work with me on this.
Yeah.
I was really lucky playing with those guys, and Luis Vasquez too, because they really believed in what I was doing.
That's
and
great.
They trusted me as their songwriter, and leader of the band and arranger and everything like that. So when I had to kind of step away from the band stuff to work on Blue Mind, I remember kind of asking David and Chris if they would play on some of this, and kind of thinking, I understand if they don't want to because this isn't the band thing and all that. And both of them were very much just like, no, we really think what you're doing is great and we want to be a part of it. So I was very lucky to have them play on it, and they're all over the album. So I just want to make sure people know that, because it is my album, and I did write the songs and perform most of the stuff, but I really had some great session people, just from the accumulation of friends that I've made in music over the course of my life that have played on this album.
That's great.
So I was really lucky to just have a number of awesome musicians playing on Blue Mind, and the best part about it all is they're all very, very skilled, but they are my friends. I didn't choose them as some kind of financial situation or something like that. It was a friendship thing.
It's great.
And that's just the best way to make music.
That's great. So tell us, Blue Mind, how did that album title come about? Blue Mind. What was going through your head when we were titling that Blue Mind? What does that
Well, I heard about this. Somebody was telling me about this theory out there that this guy came up with. I think he even wrote a book about it called Blue Mind.
Got it. Okay.
And it was an idea that when you're like close to the water, or you're in the water, or you're on the water, etc., that it can help you. How do I say it? Just kind of do life better. You're a little more focused.
Yeah.
You're a little more motivated. You tend to perform a little better in whatever you're doing. And I remember hearing this theory and feeling like that applies to me.
Yeah.
I don't know that it can't apply to every person, but I've always been drawn to the water. I've always been drawn to the ocean.
Right.
And when I'm there, I always feel so good, and I always feel so positive and forward-thinking. And so this theory really spoke to me. And I thought about it, and I said, you know what? What a great title for my next album.
Yeah.
Because I think that this theory really ties into something that I'm doing musically.
It does, and it works the same with me. It seems like you could have a million problems, but you can kind of either forget about them for a while when you go and be by the water or the ocean, or it actually has the power of healing in some cases, just being by the water.
Yeah, I very much believe that.
So we're about to play one more song from you. This would be probably a song that maybe it's a fan favorite, maybe it's one of your favorites. It seems to be a really cool pop song. But before we do play that, Blaine, why don't you tell our listeners how they can find you? All your social media networks, any contacts, how they can find you and follow you and listen to your music. Tell our listeners how they can find you, Blaine.
Great, yeah. Well, if anybody would like to get in contact with me, or if they'd like to check out my music or check out me as a musician or whatever, of course, I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook. You can find me under Blaine Campbell. I have a fan page there. You can add me or like me or whatever, where you could get information. I'm also on Twitter. You can find me under Blaine Campbell, or either I might be Blaine L. Campbell on Twitter.
Yes.
And then also, I've got a Bandcamp page. All of my music is logged in there, so you can see all of the albums I've ever made. They're all for sale. If you'd like to buy it digitally, it's blainecampbell.bandcamp.com. And then lastly, I would suggest if anybody is interested in buying a CD or an MP3 or anything like that of the Blue Mind album, it can always be found on Amazon.com, or it can also be found on CDBaby.com and maybe a few other outlets, but those are the two I'm most familiar with off the top of my head.
And Blaine, spell your name for everybody, since Campbell could be spelled slightly different, so could Blaine.
Yeah, so it's BLAINE, that's Blaine. And then Campbell, we spell it just like the soup company. So it's CAMPBELL.
All right, that's Blaine Campbell Music. Again, on Facebook is Blaine Campbell. Now, if you go to his personal page, ladies, don't stalk him, okay? He's married and all that. But Blaine Campbell Music is also his fan page on Facebook. Twitter is Blaine L. Don't forget to put the L in the middle, Campbell. And if you'd like to email him as well, blainecampbellmusic@gmail.com. Like maybe you're out in the LA area or the surrounding areas, you want to contact him maybe for a booking or something after listening to his music. So we greatly appreciate you stopping by. Tell us a little bit about I Don't Belong Here Anymore, which is, I guess, a favorite off of the Blue Mind album. Tell us a little bit about that, Blaine.
Yeah, so that's a song I was very happy with, the way it came out. I kind of hear it as one of the singles maybe, but I don't know. I'll let the audience decide what that is. But that song, I think it's just kind of a song about growing up. It's a song about growing up. It's a song about moving on. It's about, kind of being in a situation where you're with people or friends or whatever, and this is a situation that you're often in, and you're often happy and fulfilled and everything, and realizing you've gotten to a point where this group or what's going on just isn't really doing it for you anymore. It's not very fulfilling. You don't feel like you're really getting anything out of it, and you don't really belong in that situation. It's just kind of time to move on.
Got it. So it's kind of a feeling of life has kind of maybe gone as far as it can in that certain situation. It's just time for the next chapter or next road somewhere, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe there's something more to this kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. All right. So again, folks, we want to thank you, Blaine, for stopping in. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in here today. Again, you can find Blaine Campbell on Facebook, Twitter, his Bandcamp page, and his Facebook music page as well. Any last-minute shout-outs or anything you want to say, Blaine, to either friends listening or listeners of Surf 97.3?
Well, I'd just like to thank anybody who tuned in to take a listen and take an interest. I really appreciate it. I love making music, and one of the best parts about it for me is just knowing that people are enjoying the music that I'm making. I'm enjoying it, and when other people can enjoy it too, it's just like, life is working. Life
is working for sure. Ladies and gentlemen, the album Blue Mind, the artist, Blaine Campbell, and that is it, folks. Let's check out I Don't Belong Here Anymore. Blaine, we want to thank you for calling in, stopping in. You're a friend of our station. You can stop in anytime, and maybe I'll catch up with you in L.A. in January. I'll be out there, okay?
That sounds great. Let's make sure and do it. Thanks a lot, Vern.
All right, Blaine, surf's up.
All right, take care.
guess I don't belong.